welcome in to Texans Today, everybody. I'm your host, Jeremy Chuggs, and coming up on the show today, the best free agent options on the offensive line for your Houston Texans. I'll be breaking them down, different categories of guys. It's not just a ranking list of like top 10, just because there's kind of different levels to it, right? I mean, you know, we all know there's different levels of this stuff. But we'll be breaking them down based on like age, based on if they're coming off injury, this, that, and the other. So stick around. I have all the offensive linemen you need to know about, mainly on the interior for your Houston Texans. But we're talking free agents, talking about free agency. I want to know, who's your favorite free agent signing for the Texans all time? Might end up being Danielle Hunter. He was been an absolute beast. I remember, Jonathan Joseph, great free agent signing, a low-key free agent signing for the Texans. Vontae Leach was another really good one. Let me know down in the comment section. Your favorite free agent signing of all time for the Houston Texans? Was it the Honey Badger, Tyrann Mathieu? I'm just thinking of him off the top of the dome. Let me know down in the comment section if you have a favorite free agent signing of all time for the Houston Texans. Lamar Miller's another one. Lamar Miller, a pretty good one as well. All right, let's get into the meat of today's show. I want to hit you with the bad news before I give you all, the good options, because I know the whole show you'll be thinking in your mind, Jeremy, why are we not talking about Trey Smith or Mekhi Becton? They're so good. I know. They're great. They're really good. These guys are arguably the best, free agent interior offensive linemen in this cycle, but just bad news, the Texans won't be able to afford them. I really don't foresee the Texans, unless they make some drastic moves this offseason with trades and cutting guys, I don't think they'll be able to afford Trey Smith from the Chiefs, Mekhi Becton from the Eagles, or Will Fries from the Indianapolis Colts. Even though he's coming off injury, a lot of people are projecting him to get around that $14, $15 million a year range because of how well he played before and the fact that he's still only 26 years old. But regardless of if the Texans can't afford those guys or if they can't afford those guys, a fact is they need to make some room. You got to make some room. You got to trim some fat. The Texans currently in the bottom 10 of the league in free agency, not in free agency, in terms of cap space heading into free agency. There's always moves to be made. Like I said, there's trades. I already did a video on some trades that could help us, save some cap space. There's obviously cuts that can be made. There's only so much you can do, but the Texans can make some wiggle room for themselves before free agency hits. And coming up, make sure you hit that sub button, because later on next week, I'll be making a video on how exactly the Texans can clear up that cap space with a couple trades, maybe with a couple of cuts, some post-June designated cuts as well. Hit that sub button. Make sure your notifications are turned on and be on the lookout, because I'll be dropping that video early on next week. So let's look at some guys that the Texans could possibly get. These are some older guys, I know, maybe a little long in the tooth, but these are some stopgap options if the Texans are just like, hey, I want somebody for maybe 1 or 2 seasons just to stabilize the offensive line, make sure Stroud is on his feet for his third season, a very important third season for CJ Stroud as he tries to get back on the right track. Maybe they're like, we want somebody who's been there, done that, who's a little bit of a safer option. So here's some guys who could be just that. Maybe you look across at a division rival at somebody like a Ryan Kelly, who has played pretty well for Indianapolis this past season. Not his best year for the Colts, a 67 overall grade from PFF, 71 pass blocking, 64 run blocking, only 1 sack allowed, 1 penalty for Kelly on the season. I think that could be a decent option depending on what you want, guard or center. I think he has a little bit of that flexibility. Mainly played center, but I think if you want to kick him to guard, could be a decent option. Another one, if you're trying to stay in division, Brandon Scherff from the Jacksonville Jaguars. He's a former All-Pro, and he had trouble staying on the field. He had trouble, being able to stay healthy before going to the Jags. The past 3 years, he's been able to stay on the field and been able to play almost every single game for Jacksonville. Last year, decent PFF grades. Now, I will throw it in there because I know I'm going to see it in the comments about Brandon Scherff. Yes, a little bit of bad blood between him and Azeez Al-Shaair. They got into that fight after Azeez knocked out Trevor Lawrence from that game. We're all professionals here, right? I think they can get past it. Hopefully, maybe. If not, there's another stopgap option that's a pretty decent one. And Kevin Zeitler out of Detroit, the Lions' offensive line, widely regarded as one of the best O-lines in the entire National Football League this past season. I would probably say it was them and the Philadelphia Eagles. Zeitler posted great PFF grades last year at 86.8 overall, pass blocking 71.8, run blocking 87.2. 5 sacks allowed, 2 penalties on the season, but he could be another great option if the Texans are like, hey, we just want somebody who we can trust, who's like, hey, this is going to be a decent option. He doesn't have to be a great guard, but just stabilize one of the guard spots, preferably the right guard position, because Shaq Mason was not it last year. But those could be some options if you're looking for a quick fix, say like 1 to 2 year deal. Now, coming up, I have some guys who are maybe some more long-term plans, maybe some younger guys who could help the Texans out in the long term. I'll tell you who those names are in just a moment, but I couldn't do today's show if it wasn't for our amazing sponsors over at PrizePicks. Get started today with America's #1 daily fantasy sports app out there. Over 10 million active members. I mean, 10 million? I can't even picture. 10 million's a lot. That's a lot of people. PrizePicks, it's the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. All you do, pick more, pick less on 2 to 6 player stat projections, and you watch the winnings roll in. Get in on the daily action and watch with your friends and become part of the PrizePicks community today. You know, All-Star Weekend is here for the NBA, so maybe do something with the three-point contest, or if you're looking forward to the baseball season, they have season-long projections out now. And your Houston Astros, I know it's been a tough week for us, a tough offseason. I know. But here's some projections that I think could possibly hit this year. I mean, we're talking about hits. I'm talking about home runs. Yordan Alvarez, 34.5 home runs. Give me the more on that. Give me the more. Christian Walker, 30.5. The newest free agent addition for the Houston Astros, 30.5. This is me just trying to will it. I'm going more on that. Framber Valdez, I mean, you would hope that your ace gets 11.5 wins, right? Like, I would hope the more. If the Astros want any chance to make the playoffs, you want the more on that. And then Kyle Tucker, our sweet prince, now with the Chicago Cubs, which I'm just realizing my producer right now is a Cubs fan, so he's fist pumping in the background right now for Kyle Tucker. I'll go the more on 29.5 home runs for that. Do the more, do the less, whatever you want to do. Do it on PrizePicks. $50 instantly when you play $5 when you use code CLNS. Yeah, $50 instantly. You play $5. Just use that code CLNS. You don't need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. So get started with our friends over at PrizePicks. Run your game. Hopefully the Astros run their game this season because they lost a lot of guys. Bregman, I'm wishing you the best of luck in Boston. Maybe not. But here's some guys coming off of injury that the Texans could add on the interior of the offensive line. Here are guys who, still in that youngish range, coming off injury from this past season. I think some decent options here, right? Like, not bad. I mean, might cost you a little bit in free agency, but honestly, a lot less because they're coming off of injury. And maybe one of my favorite options in this list is James Daniels from the Pittsburgh Steelers. Before he got injured last year, I mean, he was the second best guard rated by PFF, 92.9 overall grade. I talked to our Steelers host, Jack Sperry. He did say he's a better run blocker than a pass blocker, but he's not a bad pass blocker. Still on the right side of 30. I believe he's 28 years old right now. So, I mean, James Daniels, for me, if everything's looking good with him coming off of that injury, I am full steam ahead, full go on the idea of adding James Daniels. He's comfortable playing that right guard spot. I think that could solidify that right guard position, get a veteran in there. And if you do want to start Blake Fisher at right tackle, this helps a ton having somebody with experience right there on the right guard spot. Maybe you don't want to go James Daniels. Maybe, the injury concerns a little bit too much with that. Maybe you go Tevin Jenkins, which I know I just said injury concerns, but I know Tevin Jenkins also has a hard time staying on the field as well. I talked to our Bears host, Harrison Graham, and he said Tevin Jenkins is good. He's decent, but has trouble staying on the field. And we know the Chicago Bears offensive line last season, which you can't put it on one guy, but if we thought the Texans O-line was bad, the Bears offensive line was arguably worse than the Texans offensive line. So I really do think that, he could be an option for the Texans, but at the end of the day, I lean more James Daniels. I lean more James Daniels on that end. And then one more person coming off of injury that I did want to talk about was Jedrick Wills, who I think could be another option. Played in Cleveland, but hey, got injured, only played around like 200-something snaps last season. I think that could be another, coming off of injury guy as well. And then the last list that I wanted to show you was young guys with something to prove. I think there's a couple guys who I really believe could, prove something to a lot of people coming into this next season. These four guys hitting free agency: Patrick Mekhi, Aaron Banks, Josh Myers, Brady Christensen, all young guys, maybe didn't get the best shake at where they were before, or maybe just on a team that's not going to bring them back and has better options, just like Patrick Mekhi and Aaron Banks with Baltimore and San Francisco, because the Texans aren't the only team that are facing some cap concerns. A lot of teams around the league, some of the best teams in the league, they're really good. They have really good players, so they have to pay to retain them. So maybe a team like Baltimore can't retain a guy like Patrick Mekhi, who has played a lot of snaps for them over the past couple of seasons. This past year, almost 1,000 snaps for the Ravens on a team that had I do say PFF isn't the end-all, be-all. They were one of the best running teams in the NFL. I don't know how Mekhi has a 58.1 run blocking grade. Maybe it's because he has 14 penalties on the year, but this could be a guy who you sign on the cheap and you're like, hey, he's had a lot of time in the league, has had some ups, has had some downs, and maybe a cheaper option for you. Same could be said about the Green Bay Packers center Josh Myers. Now, I do think Green Bay probably re-signs him to keep that continuity along the offensive line. Their OC, Stinovich, offensive line coach as well, a former offensive line coach, really big on those guys up front. So I think Josh Myers could be somebody that stays with the Packers, but somebody who I do think could be on the move, I talked to our 49ers host, Chase Sr., is Aaron Banks. The 49ers, they have a lot of tough decisions to make coming up. They're going to have to pay Brock Purdy, pay a lot of guys on that team, and Aaron Banks might be somebody who's expendable for them. I really like Aaron Banks as an option for the Texans if the money works out, because he played in a similar system to what the Texans are going to run with the San Francisco 49ers. Has played well there. If the 49ers don't draft Pooney this past year and he just comes onto the scene and is a better guard than Aaron Banks, I think they more or less prioritize Aaron Banks in free agency. But because they have Pooney at that other guard spot, I think they'll let Banks go, and the Texans might be able to snatch him up and keep him for one of our guard positions. I really like the idea of going out and getting an Aaron Banks in free agency. Now, I know I threw a ton of names at you. I threw a ton of people at you on this video. Let me know. Who do you think the Texans should sign for the offensive line? If anybody at all. Do you think the Texans need to sign somebody in free agency? Is there somebody that I didn't name? Is there somebody from my list that you're like, Jeremy, I can't even believe that you had that person on your list? Let me know down in the comment section your thoughts. Who do you think the Texans should sign for the offensive line? That's all I have for you on today's video, folks. Make sure you hit that sub button. Never miss a moment of Texans football all off season long here on Texans Today. Was the Jedrick Wills one?